Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is Max and Stacy Report coming to you from El Salvador, land of the free, home of the Bitcoin. Hello. Hello. We brought this with us from America and still can't get it to work. NVK, can you help us? Stacy.
Actually, he will be here in November, and he's going to spend the whole month teaching us how to use that clock. But you know what? Paso a paso, step by step, we learn these things, like how to turn on our block clock. But we're here to report that we now have 7 Bitcoin programmers here in El Salvador after our class with Jimmy Song, who is the premier educator on Bitcoin programming. So we now have 7 homegrown Bitcoin programmers who passed the test to get into the course and then passed the course. So they have the certificate proving they were trained by Jimmy Song himself.
Well, this is an amazing story, and it reminds me when you told me about this Jimmy Song boot camp for developers, Bitcoin developers, and I asked you how many, and you said 7. I immediately thought of those Mercury astronauts. I think there might have been 7 of them, and they were called the Mercury 7. And that was the beginning of the astronaut role in the United States, and the beginning of the Apollo space program. And one very visionary president, John F. Kennedy, set the motion, set the tone by saying, we will land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. I feel President Bukele, similarly, the JFK meet Steve Jobs of presidents, has made a goal for this country to be absolutely the leader in Bitcoin globally and to make Bitcoin the global standard. And those 7 developers are the beginning. They're going to take this country to the Bitcoin moon.
You know, you said you think there were 7 astronauts. They were called the Mercury 7. So usually it sounds like the name suggests that there were 7. So I'm assuming there were 7.
Well, sometimes I think of the Secaucus 7, which was a political organization at that time near to the Weather Underground. You remember, I'm a child of the 70s, and a lot of what happened during that decade I don't remember.
Right. Well, so we have the 7 programmers here, the 7 Salvadoran programmers, the 7 Salvadoran Satoshi geniuses, right? So we also have the securities laws coming in, the new Bitcoin securities laws, and this is the stack that Satoshi built for El Salvador, right? This is the stack that is built upon the 7, that is built upon the Bitcoin law, is built upon these new securities laws, is built upon the vision that President Bukele has for this nation in terms of where we can go, how to leapfrog ahead of even what Singapore built into the future upon these laws and upon these sort of programmers, because 7 then becomes 17, becomes 70. I'm sure the math doesn't add up, I'm not doing the math correctly in terms of goes 7, 17, 70, but I wanted to start with S.
No, it's Stacy math, which is kind of not Euclidean geometry. It's not algebra. It's a special mathematical formula that's built on the root of 7 and then goes in a direction that many would say is improbable.
Exactly. Well, you know what is improbable is default here in El Salvador, because failure is not an option. El Salvador will not fail, and we have said that. I've said that many times on Twitter. When people keep on saying El Salvador has failed, like the Bitcoin program policy has failed, it hasn't failed, and they keep on saying that it's going to default. And I tell Bloomberg, I tell Wall Street Journal, and I've told them it's not going to default. And they choose not to quote me. They choose instead to quote the people who say it's going to fail. So Morgan Stanley agrees with me, because here's the headline: Morgan Stanley encourages investors to buy battered El Salvador Euro bonds. I'm laughing because they have this image that I didn't know why they had this image. And it dawned on me that they think this is President Bukele, but it looks like some deranged honky. Look at that.
Oh, that's Jamie Dimon. Right before they shot a scene from Eyes Wide Shut. He's with a group of scantily clad bankers somewhere in a lair underneath Wall Street doing unnatural things.
Right. Well, anyway, they said that Morgan Stanley is encouraging their clients to buy these El Salvador bonds because they're trading at 25 cents when they said even if they do default, they should be trading at 43 cents, not 25 cents. But they reckon they're not going to default because they have the money to pay the payment due in January.
Well, no, I was talking to Josue Lopez about this. You know, he's a private equity guy from Switzerland. He's been on our show. And he said, look, the way the private equity crowd is looking at these bonds is at 23, 24 cents on the dollar. It's an easy double. And because the underlying fundamentals in this country are outstanding, and the market is unusually punishing these bonds purely out of spite, purely for political reasons. And so this is where private equity, that's how you become a billionaire. That's why Josue's going to be a billionaire, because he looks at this stuff and he's like, you know what? I want to be a billionaire. I'm going to buy this paper at 23 cents on the dollar. It's going to go to 40, 50, 60 cents on the dollar, and I'm going to have the last laugh. That's how billionaires become billionaires.
So the guy who wrote this for Morgan Stanley, his name is Simon Weaver. He's the global head of emerging market sovereign credit strategy at Morgan Stanley. And he told investors in a Tuesday note that El Salvador's bonds are overly punished by the market conditions, despite the country having better financial metrics than many of its peers, reported Bloomberg. The note to investors read, markets are clearly pricing in a high probability of the autarky scene in which El Salvador defaults, but there's no restructuring. And just so you know out there, autarky means self-sufficiency, independence, specifically national economic self-sufficiency and independence, a policy of establishing a self-sufficient and independent national economy, which kind of sounds like positive, but in fact it means a negative thing in terms of economics because it's like you're shut off from the rest of the global economy.
I've never seen the word autarky in a financial report. And you're right. When you first see it, you're like, well, that's a positive thing because they're insulating themselves from the vagaries of these outside markets that seem like they're in chaos. And they have Bitcoin, and they're growing their own GDP organically. They've got the tourism. They've got the forward investment coming in. They've got the infrastructure build out. And they really are, it really is an autarky. But that's in this context, that's not a negative. And I think that's where investors potentially are seeing this. You know what? This is a non-correlated asset, to put it in pure financial terms. When you're investing today in a world dominated by these global central banks who are all in the same trade, they're all on the same side of the same trade, and that is easy money. El Salvador is going against the trend and saying, you know, we can grow organically our own economy. Bitcoin is at the center of it, and we're not exposed to that risk. So if you're trying to get an uncorrelated trade and get pure alpha, pure return, El Salvador is probably the best, most underrated play in the globe today.
Of course, the president, everybody in this country wants more investment in the country. People are investing in this country. He's inviting people into this country. That's what he said in the State of the Union. He wants people to come to this country. That's the opposite of autarky. He's not closing it off. So they're wrong. Well, Morgan Stanley is telling their clients they're wrong to bet on that. That's not the outcome. But of course, what they're doing is they're reading the wrong newspapers or tuning into the wrong shows on YouTube. They should be tuning into this sort of program rather than Bloomberg, rather than Wall Street Journal. As I said earlier, they have spoken to me but failed to quote me, even though I told them months ago, people could have got in at 25 cents or under 25 cents and said they're going to have to get in at 45, 55, 65 cents instead when these bond payments are made. And there was a recent report out in the past week or so from one of these financial newspapers, and they said that the number one risk of default in the whole entire world is El Salvador. But what this guy from Morgan Stanley says is the Tuesday note assessed that El Salvador shouldn't have any problem repaying debts for the next 12 months because of the primary surplus. Plus, it has smaller maturities coming due than other distressed nations like Argentina, Egypt, and Ukraine. So again, people are listening to the wrong information, and they're going to lose money by listening to the wrong information. But that's what bias does. That's what political bias, cultural bias, any sort of bias is a way to lose money. That's a way to lose money because you get sold a bag of bad investment advice.
Right, markets can remain irrational longer than you have funds. And so having a bias in a market setting can be death to a portfolio performance. And to your point, it's an autarky not by the suggestion of those running the country. The country, as you point out, is opening to the world and saying, come on in and invest. And they're getting a lot of investment from around the world, but it's the perception from people who have that bias. And that's why they're missing the bet. They can't even describe it accurately in a financial paper. And that's where the smart money sees, you know what, there's an arbitrage here between the perception and what's really on the ground. And obviously, Salvadorans who are in the money market business, as we've just mentioned, they are salivating at this opportunity, and money's being raised in the billions.
Right. I mean, again, like they don't give agency to the people here, the president here. He himself gets up on stage and says, we're going to be like Singapore. And yet they decide in the mainstream financial press to just report what they themselves say about the country. They're saying like, oh, it's like an autarky. Closed off.
Look, I was a stockbroker in the 80s, very successful. I had a dot-com in the 90s, very successful. I started buying Bitcoin in 2011 at $1, very successful. I'm now in El Salvador. Is that a freaking coincidence? Or am I going to be in the place that I want to be? I want to be in the hot place. I want to be in the hot market. I want to be where the parrots and the torgos are flying around free. It's free to be who they are. And I want to have Bitcoin grenades exploding and all over the world. And I want this to work. And I want it to work this week. That's what I want.
That's what we want, and that's why we're here. And I'll read you another thing, just the headline here, just to juxtapose and show you, you know, maybe if they look at themselves and maybe reflect a little bit more on themselves, they might see that the shortcomings are in themselves, and perhaps they're projecting that. And I'm going to read you a headline, Max. JP Morgan trader spoofed so fast, colleagues urged ice on fingers. Greg Smith clicked his computer mouse so rapidly to place and cancel bogus gold and silver orders for Bear Stearns and later JP Morgan that his colleagues would joke that he needed to put ice on his fingers to cool them down afterward, or that he just must be double jointed.
We've been saying for years now, reporting on JP Morgan spoofing or manipulating the precious metals markets, and they deny it. But now the proof is coming out. And this is what America is all about. Manipulating the markets, you know, playing video games, getting finger, you know, burns and calluses on their finger by manipulating the markets. And that's why that economy is going into the toilet, because they've got nobody doing anything productive in that frickin' wasteland between Canada and Mexico called America. It's a complete dump. Whereas down here in Central America, people are saying, you know what, we've been down, now we're going to be up, and we're productive, and that's a total different story.
But let's wrap this up with what I have to say here in terms of that, because what they're doing with a spoofing is it's a form of propaganda, it's price propaganda. They're manipulating the perception within the market of what was actually happening, so that JP Morgan, and of course before that Bear Stearns, because remember Bear Stearns inherited a huge precious metals position from Bear Stearns when they were gifted that during the financial crisis in early 2009, or 2008 they in fact inherited it. So that's price propaganda through spoofing. And the same thing happens with, on a huge scale, geopolitically, geoeconomically, culturally, the bias that I'm saying is like they, like fat finger, like all sorts of fake news about how El Salvador is failing, and it's totally fake. And they're spoofing the other participants, as the first headline proved, that Morgan Stanley is telling you, hey dudes, clients, you're being spoofed, essentially. There is no there to that story. They're not going to not make the payment. They are going to make the payment, and you're being spoofed and tricked and deceived into selling your bonds when you should be buying them.
So dramatic and well reported, as usual, Stacy Herbert on the case. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to Max and Stacy Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Jimmy Song, author of these fine books that I'm holding here in my hand. Bitcoin, the American Dream, The Little Book of Bitcoin. Thank God for Bitcoin. I get the title wrong?
Little Bitcoin book.
Oh, Little Bitcoin Book. There you go. Jimmy, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Max. Good
All
to see you again.
Let's get into this. You have taught your course, Programming Bitcoin, to a group of Salvadorans. How was the experience? What talent do they walk away with? I take it this is actually from your book, Programming Bitcoin, right?
Mm-hmm. It is, and I've taught this course many, many times, and it was interesting teaching it here because I hadn't done it to Spanish-speaking audience. They spoke English, of course, but Spanish I think is their native language. It was really good. Taught a bunch of them, and the hope is that they will contribute to the Bitcoin ecosystem and the economy of El Salvador as they use these skills for bettering Bitcoin.
Right. Well, this whole idea started with Stacy Herbert recognizing that to get this revolution going here in El Salvador, they needed homegrown developers, homegrown Bitcoin developers. And she got in touch with you, of course, because you're probably the most notable guy who's out there teaching the Bitcoin development curriculum. And you made a comment early on, and I wanted to ask you about it. You said something to the effect of, well, all you need is 8 or 9 hardcore Bitcoin developers to get the ball rolling. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the thing about Bitcoin is once you have a few really dedicated Bitcoiners, there's sort of like an infection, right? Like they get other people interested, and especially with the massive opportunities that are available here. I think what will happen is that more people will be desiring to come into the space as they see some of their compatriots, make money and do some really interesting things. So you really don't need that much to get started. And once you get the ball rolling and people see the opportunity, I think you will see a lot of very interesting developments here with the opportunities that are available.
Does El Salvador have an opportunity to be kind of the Central American and even a Latin American hub for sourcing Bitcoin developers from the region and around the world? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to see El Salvador be sort of like the source of a lot of great Spanish Bitcoin content, whether it be technical or non-technical. But this is the first step, and we're seeing that the country is committed to Bitcoin, that you have the government backing this stuff, you have the president backing this stuff, you have a lot of people that are very happy to see it continue. So I think that's what we're seeing is opportunity is knocking and people are taking advantage, and couldn't be more excited.
Now, you had the chance to meet Ibrahim Bukele, one of the brothers of the president. He managed to pass the test, actually. It would take to enter the program, the Bitcoin course, so he's obviously a smart guy. How do you feel that conversation went in terms of the vision of the future of El Salvador? I was in the room when this happened, and you were talking about how the test to get into the course is a fairly strenuous test. And Ibrahim asked, well, what's a question for the test? And you gave him the question, and he solved it in 15 seconds. So what does that tell you? Does that give you confidence?
Yeah, I could kind of tell that he was a pretty smart man, and I just went with my instincts and told him the problem, and he figured it out. That tells me that he is focused on making the country really great, and he's committed to making everything work and really giving the people of El Salvador a real lifeline to make something of themselves. And we were talking about some of the possible education initiatives. They have a real opportunity here to really try different things with the education system, try different things with the people that are coming up. I was talking to him about how, a lot of high schools teach trigonometry and calculus. I don't really know why they're doing it. It was very useful 100 years ago, in a digital economy, it's much more important to learn maybe discrete math, combinatorics, graph theory, finite fields, group theory, stuff like that, which you totally can in high school. It's just that nobody's really taken that step. And I was encouraging him to maybe think in that direction because, experimenting and seeing what this country can do with this stuff and really outcompeting a lot of the other countries that are stuck in their old ways, I think will be the advantage that this country has.
So the average course load for a high school student and even a college student in schools around the world would be these legacy mathematical curriculums, which you point out, trigonometry and other mathematical disciplines. And what you're saying is that in the Bitcoin era, it's really moved on to a different paradigm. You call it discrete mathematics. I looked at that briefly on Wikipedia. It covers elliptical curve and graphs and things like that. So just briefly, what is discrete mathematics? And I should mention that it is raining outside. This is the rainy season. If you hear the rain, welcome to El Salvador in the rainy season. But how would you differentiate these two?
Yeah, so digital or discrete math is way more friendlier to computers. And of course, computers are a big part of life, and being able to program them and getting them to do what you want, it's almost all discrete mathematics. And the more continuous stuff that we've been taught, like trigonometry, calculus, things like that, that was for an era where you were building some of the physical things, which you still need. But if you want to sort of succeed in a digital economy, you really need a lot more discrete math. And every computer programmer kind of knows this. It's like they don't use calculus, but combinatorics and different ways of doing those are things that you use all the time because that's what computers are good at.
So you're saying that El Salvador has a chance to fork. There's a fork in the road, and they can go down this path of discrete mathematics, which is apropos for computers, and really become a leader around the world. You also mentioned that El Salvador has a chance to become the equivalent or even a superior in some ways to Singapore. And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so Singapore obviously was one of those countries that raised themselves up by the bootstraps. I think Lu Quan, I can't remember his name, but he eliminated a lot of the bad stuff people were doing, kind of like President Bukele is doing here. But they could go beyond that because Singapore was a little bit more on the authoritarian side, and they did sort of manage to become sort of like the leader in financial services, which for me is largely due to Cantillon effects, or they took advantage of some of those. I can see this place becoming maybe some sort of a Bitcoin hub, a way to figure out like arbitrage in a lot of different areas where the world elites have just sort of led the rest of the world down the wrong road. We could see this place thriving and growing, and you could even when I was here 6 months ago, things have changed a lot. Things are being built. There's you could just see it out in the street. I can see it having the sort of like the Asian miracle kind of stuff happen here, not necessarily through Cantillon effects, which I suspect some of that stuff in, say, Singapore, Japan, Korea were, but instead much more based on markets and people thriving and lifting everybody up. And I would love to see that. I think it's starting, and it's very exciting to be around.
Right, as I recall in Singapore, they started off from having the problem of just having mosquitoes. It was tropical latitudes, and it required a Herculean effort to get rid of this, and that really was something simple like that, seemingly, but it was the basis for really a big transformation. And here, we're talking about the Renaissance, the Salvadoran Renaissance, an actual cultural transformation, because Bitcoin is really something that gets people, as you say, it's an infection almost, and the rain is really coming down now, and I hope this is coming through. But anyway, the Renaissance and cultural transformation, you said you were here 6 months ago, and you've come back and you see some changes. Are you seeing hints of this type of vision?
Yes, and I was born in Korea in the 70s, and even while I was there, you can see sort of transformation happening almost on a daily basis. And obviously, Seoul is one of the most high-tech cities in the world at this point, but it wasn't always. And back when I was born in the 70s, there it was rather backwards. I can see that level of quick transformation happening here. And I am so excited to see, we were having dinner the other day and we were looking out at the skyline and we were wondering what the skyline would look like in 20 years. I will bet you anything that it's going to be vastly different and it's going to be way more high tech than it is now, and it will have surpassed a lot of cities in the world, I imagine.
All right, now here's your chance to speak directly to government here in El Salvador. What's your pitch to those in government, whether here or anywhere else really that adopts Bitcoin, who are tempted to go down the path of what we call euphemistically shitcoins? Because I saw that in the Central African Republic of CAR, they said, we'll make Bitcoin legal tender, and then very quickly the shitcoiners moved in, and it looks they're poisoning the water. Here in El Salvador, it's been an effort to keep these people out, and to let them know that they're not wanted with their Ponzi schemes and their Luna, the DeFi, all that garbage that's destroying a lot of these companies and a lot of people. How do you communicate that to government? How do you communicate? What's your message? Back in the 70s, there was an ad on TV. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. It showed a fried egg. You mentioned the 70s. How would you communicate that to the governments around the world? This is your economy on Bitcoin. This is your economy on shitcoins, and show madness and mayhem. How would you do it?
Well, so I would say think back to the IMF, the World Bank, WEF, and what they've done for you, right? They almost always come with candy. Hey, we're gonna give you these loans, and you're gonna be able to get out of the financial debt you're in. You can even embezzle some money. We'll look the other way, and the elites can benefit. Just that if you can't pay back the loan, we're gonna take all your stuff and use it for Western companies or whatever. Salvadorans know this. A lot of the land here has been appropriated by, non-Salvadoran companies and so on. I believe that all these altcoin companies are essentially here to do the same thing. They'll entice you with, hey, we'll put, $5 million here, $5 million here. You have to be very careful. Right? What are they actually after?
It's like the IMF.
Yeah, it's like the IMF.
It's the same scam.
Yeah, it's the same scam.
Right? It's colonialism.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned it was colonialism on the blockchain. It's communism on the blockchain.
Yeah, and what Bitcoin allows is your ability to actually earn your way to getting wealth and prosperity rather than trying to financialize your way, which is what IMF does, which is essentially what every altcoin does. They're financializing and using DeFi or rehypothecation or whatever to sort of have this pretend paper wealth as a way to prosperity. That doesn't work. It never worked. Didn't work with the IMF. It's not going to work with altcoins. But with Bitcoin, you have an actual way of building up savings, creating a manufacturing base, being able to say no to the IMFs and the terrible trade deals that they make you sign, getting out from under them as they expire, and actually having a base of economic power by which you can actually, create prosperity that's not financialized, that's not based on Cantillon effects, but based on real economic growth, on actual value provided to the rest of the world.
All right, great. So the course was Programming Bitcoin based on your book, Programming Bitcoin, which is available to anybody who can get into a book that's almost entirely made up of numbers and no text whatsoever. Then there's Bitcoin for Politicians, this book, which is for political people. This one is, what is this one all about?
Well, that is sort of the case for Bitcoin for people that don't know anything about Bitcoin. El Pequeño Libro de Bitcoin, or the Little Bitcoin book in English. And that's for anyone that doesn't know that much about Bitcoin but want to understand why there's a really good moral case, especially in places like El Salvador.
Right, and of course, thank God for Bitcoin. It's kind of a spiritual, biblical look at Bitcoin, and we've talked at length on this topic, hours and hours. I won't have time to get into it now, but it is an ecclesiastical and philosophical treatise of wonder that if you've got a few hours, make sure you eat a steak, do some carnivory, and read this book. Jimmy Song, thanks for being on Max and Stacy Report.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
All righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of Max and Stacy Report with me, Max Keiser. And I'd like to thank our special guest, Jimmy Song. Until next time, bye, y'all.